In this video, we're going to talk about the effects of price ceilings and price floors. A price ceiling is defined to be a legally mandated maximum price. We started to see price ceilings being introduced during World War I and World War II. In both cases, the increase in wartime spending led to increase in demand and upward pressure on prices, and there was political pressure to keep prices low so that people would not resist the war effort domestically. So price controls were introduced in the form of price ceilings. The purpose of the price ceilings was to keep prices low for consumers so that basic goods could still be affordable. Some examples of price controls are rent controls, which became really widespread after World War II ended, when there was an increase in demand for housing as a result of the economic expansion that had occurred and the increase in incomes that occurred during the war. That was also when we saw the start of the baby boom. As I mentioned, during World War I and World War II, we had a fairly wide range of price controls on many basic commodities, particularly things like gas and sugar and flour and milk. We also still see anti-gouging laws in effect, which prevent companies from raising their prices substantially during a natural disaster. We often see this having a binding impact after hurricanes or floods, or during pandemics, for example, when there may be sudden increases in demands for masks or toilet paper or hand sanitizer and other products. Let's look at the economic effect. In general, a price ceiling is only going to be binding if it's set below the equilibrium. The purpose of the price ceiling is to keep prices lower. In this case, the equilibrium price is 3. If the price ceiling was set above 3, it would have simply no effect on the market, because if there was a regulation that prices could not go above 4 and the price is 3, that's going to have absolutely no effect on the market. So to have an impact, the price ceiling has to be less than where the price would be. It has to be below the equilibrium. In this case, the price ceiling is set at 2, and what we see when we have this price ceiling is a shortage. And the shortage occurs because when the price is below the equilibrium price, the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. While consumers would like to buy, in this case, somewhere around perhaps 72 or 73 units of this good, only about 39 units of the good are available. So that results in a shortage. The actual volume of transactions is always going to be the minimum of the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. Because even though a lot of people would like to buy this good, they can't buy more than what sellers are willing to sell. So what we observe is that when there's an effective price ceiling imposed, we end up with lower prices and also lower quantities. Because of the shortage, though, there's more people wanting to buy the good than there's units of the good being offered for sale. What occurs in that case is that sellers don't have much of an incentive to maintain the quality of the product. So we often observe that binding price ceilings result in a decline in the quality of the product. For example, if we take rent control in New York or many other cities, if landlords know that there are dozens or hundreds of people waiting for every apartment that's available, they don't have very much incentive to maintain the apartments, because they know if the current tenants leave, there's lots of people willing to take those apartments. So we generally see quality declines for products where there is a binding price ceiling. A price floor is defined to be a legally mandated minimum price. These became really popular during the Great Depression. We were going through a deflationary spiral where prices were falling and output was falling. And the economic theory behind this was not terribly well developed at the time, but basically the argument was if we could stop the downward spiral in prices and wages, that perhaps the depression could end. The goal of these price floors was sort of the opposite of a price ceiling. The goal is to keep prices relatively high. So the goal basically is to benefit the seller of the good rather than the consumer. Some examples of that we saw during the Great Depression were agricultural price supports, which were designed to keep farm incomes high because we saw some dramatic declines in incomes and we saw many people losing their farms during the Great Depression, and also minimum wages, which were designed to keep wages from falling too far. For a price floor to be binding, it has to be set above the equilibrium. A price floor that says workers have to be paid a minimum wage of 30 cents an hour today wouldn't have very much of an impact on current wages because workers are already getting more than that. A minimum wage is only going to have an impact if it's above the equilibrium. Similarly, an agricultural price support is only going to benefit farmers if it raises the price from where it would have been. So a price floor becomes binding only if it's above the equilibrium price. And one of the things we observe is that in that case, there will always be a surplus. So in this case, when there's a price floor of $4 set, the quantity supplied is right around 80, and the quantity demanded is somewhere around 42. So we end up now with a surplus. If we're dealing with agricultural products, farmers have all these goods that they'd like to sell, but the quantity demanded is not sufficient to buy all of that. So we end up with significant surpluses. In agricultural markets, this takes the form of unsold crops. And what the government has done to help maintain price supports there, basically two things. It's either bought up the surplus crop, which effectively means it's increased the demand to absorb the surplus, or it's paid farmers to take land out of production, in which case it reduces the supply of those crops. So in agricultural markets, the government has taken steps to essentially absorb the surplus so that farmers aren't harmed by this. If this occurred in labor markets, we'd see unemployed workers. That's how the surplus would be realized. However, the evidence on the unemployment effects of the minimum wage is quite mixed. Many economists argue that the reason for that is while agricultural markets are very competitive, labor markets may not be. But that's a topic we'll revisit later. The main point is when prices are kept above the equilibrium, we tend to observe a surplus. You may have heard your parents or your grandparents or maybe your great-grandparents talk about how much more comfortable it used to be to fly on airlines. That seats used to be wider. They used to provide better meals. Flights were more on time. Well, all those things were in fact true, and that's because up until the 1970s, airline prices were regulated by what effectively was a price floor. The purpose of that was to keep prices high so that airlines would be profitable so that they could maintain the quality of their flights. It was argued that this was a safety concern and was necessary to keep air travel safe. But a side effect is because the quantity of airline seats supplied was greater than the quantity demanded, we ended up with a surplus, and airlines competed to try to fill the seats by improving the quality of the service. With deregulation, that surplus effectively disappeared, and airlines no longer have to be as concerned about trying to attract more customers because if they just charge the equilibrium price, they can fill every seat that they have.